know. To speak to a joint meeting of the Congress and to the nation. You see the chamber of the House of Representatives here to deliver a report on the Camp David summit meeting on the Middle East. The president has not yet entered the House chamber, but one of his partners at the summit is already there. President Anwar Sadat of Egypt and now Prime Minister Begin of Israel has just joined him, and we see them here in the VIP box in the gallery with Mrs. Rosalind Carter as the senators, difficult to know, to speak to a joint meeting of the Congress and to the nation. You see the chamber of the House of Representatives here to deliver a report on the Camp David summit meeting on the Middle East. The president has not yet entered the House chamber, but one of his partners at the summit is already there. President Anwar Sadat of Egypt and now Prime Minister Begin of Israel has just joined him, and we see them here in the VIP box in the gallery with Mrs. Rosalind Carter as the senators and representatives down below give them a standing ovation. And understandably so. For after all, it was not until last November, when Sadat flew to Jerusalem, was the world able to see Israeli and Egyptian leaders in a display of mutual goodwill. And now, very shortly, the House doorkeeper will announce the arrival of the President of the United States to report to the nation after 13 days of intensive discussion and very hard bargaining. Here he is. The Secretary of State making his entrance. This is the members of the cabinet who are coming in now. I'm sorry, I thought he was about to announce the arrival of the president. In many respects, this resembles the gathering that is usually there for the report of the State of the Union. Members of the diplomatic corps, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm not sure whether members of the Supreme Court will be there. They're all, of course, not yet in session. This will be certainly a very glorious night for President Carter. Although I must say it seems difficult to believe that anything could top last night. After those long and very uncertain discussions.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Well, here he is now. They all want to shake his hand now. The President of the United States always receives a cordial reception when he enters the chamber of the House of Representatives. Cordial, but sometimes there are varying degrees of cordiality. And Mr. Carter, who has had his problems with the Congress, is now basking in the glow of their enthusiasm and, I must say, their approbation. A Republican member of the Senate today proposed that Mr. Carter be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He's talking with Tip O'Neill and Vice President Mondale. There is a report that Mr. O'Neill persuaded the President to schedule this address for 8 o'clock tonight so that it would not interfere with the New England Patriots Baltimore Colts football game, which comes on in a little less than an hour. He's getting a standing ovation there now. It must be a sweet moment for Mr. Carter, because no one doubts he did take a great risk. Now he'll be introduced and the applause will start all over again.
I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
This is the familiar ritual. He's applauded when he arrives, and he's applauded again when introduced. There has been, across the board, nonpartisan and bipartisan approval of the achievements of the Camp David summit. Hardly a word of criticism. And many members of the Republican Party have been quite effusive in their praise of Mr. Carter. Here he is.
Vice President Mondale, Speaker O'Neill, distinguished members of the United States Congress, justices of the Supreme Court, other leaders of our great nation, ladies and gentlemen. It's been more than 2,000 years since there was peace between Egypt and a free Jewish nation. If our present expectations are realized, this year we shall see such peace again. The first thing I would like to do is to give tribute to the two men who made this impossible dream now become a real possibility. The two great leaders with whom I have met for the last 2 weeks at Camp David. First, President Anwar Sadat of Egypt. And the other, of course, is Prime Minister Menachem Begin of the nation of Israel. I know that all of you would agree that these are two men of great personal courage, representing nations of peoples who are deeply grateful to them for the achievement which they have realized. And I am personally grateful to them for what they have done. At Camp David, we sought a peace that is not only of vital importance to their own two nations, but to all the people of the Middle East, to all the people of the United States, and indeed to all the world as well. The world prayed for the success of our efforts, and I am glad to announce to you that these prayers have been answered. I've come to discuss with you tonight what these two leaders have accomplished and what this means to all of us. The United States has had no choice but to be deeply concerned about the Middle East and to try to use our influence and our efforts to advance the cause of peace. for the last 30 years, through 4 wars, the people of this troubled region have paid a terrible price in suffering and division and hatred and bloodshed. No 2 nations have suffered more than Egypt and Israel. But the dangers and the cost of conflicts in this region for our own nation have been great as well. We have long-standing friendships among the nations there and the peoples of the region, and we have profound moral commitments which are deeply rooted in our values as a people. The strategic location of these countries and the resources that they possess mean that events in the Middle East directly affect people everywhere. We and our friends could not be indifferent if a hostile power were to establish domination there. In few areas of the world is there a greater risk that a local conflict could spread among other nations adjacent to them and then perhaps erupt into a tragic confrontation between us superpowers ourselves. Our people have come to understand that unfamiliar names like Sinai, Aqaba, Sharm el-Sheikh, Ras el-Nakab, Gaza, the West Bank of Jordan, can have a direct and immediate bearing on our own well-being as a nation and our hope for a peaceful world. That is why we in the United States cannot afford to be idle bystanders, why we have been full partners in the search for peace, and why it is so vital to our nation that these meetings at Camp David have been a success. Through the long years of conflict, 4 main issues have divided the parties involved. One is the nature of peace. For the peace will simply mean that the guns are silenced, that the bombs no longer fall, that the tanks cease to roll, or whether it will mean that the nations of the Middle East can deal with each other as neighbors and as equals and as friends with a full range of diplomatic and cultural and economic and human relations between them. That's been the basic question. The Camp David Agreement has defined such relationships, I'm glad to announce to you, between Israel and Egypt.